In this video, we're going to be talking about some of the different ways that you can get information out of your program once it's done going through its processing and creating it. So let's get started. So just as we saw, we have a variety of ways to get values into our programs using the different input statements and input methods we have available within MATLAB. There are also a variety of ways to display the output of our MATLAB programs after we're done with our processing. In this video, we're going to be talking about three methods. The first is one we've already been using a little bit, and that's basically to not suppress a given statement when you execute it, basically leaving off the semicolon so the results show up in the command window. The first of the new methods we have is the display statement. So this allows us to display information into the command window. It can be words, it can be numbers, it can be the values of variables, whatever we want, but we can use display statements to do that. We also have what's called the fprintf statement. So this allows us to do a little bit more in-depth formatting of our outputs. Again, it's going to show up in the command window, but we can do things like displaying a certain number of decimal places behind a number, or displaying a mixture of both strings and numbers within the same statement. Or actually, you can use the fprintf statement to write values out to a file. We're not going to talk about that in this video, but that is one of the things you can do with the fprintf statement. So let's start off with the easiest method, and the one that you've probably already been using, which is unsuppressing statements. Right, so you know that when you write a MATLAB statement, if you put a semicolon at the end of the statement, the result does not display at the command window. If instead you remove that semicolon, then you'll be able to see what is actually occurring as a result of that command. Normally you would have something being stored into a variable, so you would see what value is being stored into that variable. All right, so for instance, if I typed in at the command window x equals 10 plus 5, the value of 15 would be stored into x, but since there's a semicolon there, I would not see any result. Versus if I typed in that same command but left off the semicolon, it would show that the value of the variable x is equal to 15. Okay, so this is the easiest way that you can use to show values at the command window as you're going through your script, and it actually works at the command window and it works in scripts as well. So if there are lines in your script that you're writing that you want to be able to display the values to the command window, you can simply leave off a semicolon. Next, we're going to talk about the first of the new methods for displaying information, that being the display statement. Okay, so a lot of times you don't just want to display a variable name and its value like we did when we took off the semicolon and did not suppress an operation in a script file or at the command window. We may also want to add some additional information, say like a message describing what the value is, or you might want to put the units on the value, or you might want to have some other message to the user. Okay. So we can do that using the display command. Okay, so the way that we would use the display command, the keyword is disp. Okay, and then what we give it is some type of constant, so we could just type a number in there and it would display that number, or we can put a variable in there and it would display the variable. So the display actually works for numbers as well as strings, or pretty much any value that you can store in MATLAB that you would want to be able to display. So let's take a quick look at a couple examples of using the display statement. So let's say we have the following script. So we have our input statement that we actually saw from the input video, radius equals input. Please enter the number, or please enter the radius. So that would prompt the user to enter a value. It would store that value into radius. We do a couple computations to compute the circumference and the area. And then we'd have a couple display statements. So the first line there, you can see the display, and then circumference is what we're going to display, and then right after that we're displaying the value of the circumference variable. And then in that next line we have display the string area and then display the variable area. So if we were to run that, okay, it would prompt us, we could enter a value 5, and then it would display circumference, which is the first display statement. Right after that it would display the value of the circumference variable, which is 31.4159, and then we'd have the area and then the value of the area variable. Okay, so pretty easy. Basically whatever you put inside the parentheses for the display statement is going to be displayed to the command window. So we saw with the display statement we can do some nice formatting, we can display messages and we can display values and things like that, but we may want to do some additional formatting as well. For that we use the fprintf statement. Okay, so things we can do with the fprintf statement that we can't do with the display statement. So we can actually now start to mix strings and values together into a coherence. So you could actually create a sentence, for instance, and say the value of the circumference is 31 whatever, like we saw in the previous example. And you can actually specify the number of decimal places used when you're displaying a number. Okay, so these are things we can't do with the display statement that as we'll see in a second here, we can do with the fprintf statement. Okay, so when you're going to use the fprintf, it's going to take the following form. So our MATLAB keyword is fprintf. Inside the command for the fprintf, we have first a formatted message, and we'll talk in a second here about what that formatted message looks like. But this is basically what's going to be displayed at the command window. And then we have a list of values. These can be strings or numbers or any type of value in MATLAB that you want to be inserted into your formatted message. Since the main component of the fprintf statement is that formatted message, let's talk a little bit about how we create that. So within the formatted message portion of the fprintf statement, we have what are called insertion formats. Okay, so these are basically going to be placeholders that are going to allow us to insert values from our variables into our message. So the first thing we have is the placeholder for a string. So all of these begin with the percent symbol, like you were creating a comment, though in this case we're not creating a comment. So %s says that I want to insert a string at this location. We have %i says I want to insert an integer number, so a number without any decimal points or any decimal places. And then we have %f, which inserts a floating point or a decimal number. Okay, we also have some what we call escape characters. Basically, these are ways that you can format the message. So the first one is /n, and this says that you want to move to the next line. Generally, whenever you create an fprintf statement, you're always going to want to put this /n at the end, so it moves you down to the next line. We also have /t, which allows you to insert a tab, so you can put some space in your message if you want to. We have the double slash, which allows you to actually place a slash character in your message, right? Because otherwise it's going to expect that when it sees a slash, that it's starting an escape character. And if you want to actually display a percent symbol, we use the %%, because otherwise, if it sees the percent symbol inside your formatted message, it thinks it's one of the insertion formats. Okay. And also, if you want to display a single quotation mark within your message, you have to use 2 single quotation marks. Otherwise, it thinks that a single quotation mark indicates the end of your formatted message. Since your message is going to be a string, you always start and end with the single quotation mark. The one thing that we said before about how you could specify the number of decimal points in a number is what you see here. So when you're using %f, there are 2 additional things that you can place, and basically you place them between the percent and that f. So the first number, the number that you would place in the w location, specifies the width or the number of characters you want to use to display a value. Generally, you're not going to use this. You just put a 0 there or leave it off, because you're just going to display however many numbers is necessary. But you can use this to help you in spacing out and doing some formatting. If you were, for instance, trying to create a table of values in your command window, you could use that. The more important part is the value after the decimal point, that p, which specifies how many decimal places you want to use to display your floating point or your decimal number. So the fprintf statement can be kind of confusing until you see an actual example. So let's go ahead and take a look at some. So let's assume that we have 3 variables. We have a variable called day, which has the string Wednesday. We have a variable called weather, which has the value sunny. And we have the variable temp, which has the value 75. So if I were to type in this fprintf statement, today is %s/n, and then the variable that I gave it was day, so we have one format insertion, the %s, which says I want to insert a string, and we also have the escape character for the new line. And then, so what's going to happen when I were to type enter is it would say today is, and then it would take the value that's in that day variable and plug it in where it sees the %s. So it would say today is Wednesday, and then it would move down to the next line. Okay. Let's look at a slightly more complicated fprintf statement. So you can say the weather today is %s. Okay. So again, we're inserting a string at this location, and the temperature is %i. Okay, so %i is an integer number, so we're going to be displaying an integer value there. And again, we have the new line character to move us down to the next line. Notice now that we have 2 variables, so the first variable in that list will be stored or will be displayed at the first insertion character, so the %s, so weather will be displayed in %s, temp will be displayed in %i. So if we run this command, what you would see then is the weather today is sunny, so it inserts the value for weather into the %s, and the temperature is 75, so it takes the value of temp and inserts it at %i. Okay, again, similar statement, but now we are using the floating point or decimal version instead of the integer version. So now we have the weather is again %s, so we're going to insert a string. We have %0.3f, so this says we're inserting a floating point number, and we're going to use 3 decimal places because we have the 0.3 there. So when we run this command, we end up with the weather today is sunny, again inserting that word, and the temperature is 75.000. The last thing we should talk about is what happens if you accidentally mess up the fprintf statement. So in this case, we have the same command that we had before, but we accidentally switched the order of our variables, temp and weather. So if we run this, this is what we would actually get. The weather today is capital K, and the temperature is 115.000. Okay, so that makes absolutely no sense. What is MATLAB actually doing? If you remember back to the beginning of the course, we talked about how any word or any string is actually stored by its ASCII values. So what happens when you try to display temp, which is a number, as a string, it converts it from the number 75 and treats it like the ASCII value, which happens to be the ASCII value for the capital K. The same thing is happening when you try to display weather, which is a string, using a number. So it actually takes the ASCII value for the capital W, which in this case is 115, and displays that as a number. Okay, so if you're using your fprintf statements and things aren't coming out the way you expect, make sure that your variables are in the right order and you're using the correct insertion character to display that type of variable. So that brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you've now gained some new skills you can use to help you in displaying the results of your program.